most interesting is Finisterre, ovvero è nato il mammino, The End of the Earth, or Baby Jesus is Born, written in first stage in 2014. Finisterre demystifies the otherness with which immigrants are often charged in Italian media and public discourses, and focuses instead on the notion of Mare Nostrum as a spatial and epistemological site where individuals of different races and ethnicities negotiate their respective differences. The background of this play is the Mediterranean. The protagonists, Carbieri and Peppe, they're both played by these two actors, Alec and Stephen Nicola Pistoia. Those are kind of usual collaborators of Gianni Clementi, and they play, for example, in possibly the most famous play written by Clementi, which is Ben-Hur, in Gladiatore in Affitto, which was later turned into a very successful movie. Anyway, the protagonists, Carbieri and Peppe, are contrabandists waiting on an unspecified Sicilian shore for the delivery of cigarettes that should arrive momentarily via an Albanian smuggler. It's Christmas Eve, and everyone else is busy either consuming a festive meal or attending Mass. In the opening scene, he's rehearsing a poem to recite later that evening at a live nativity in his hometown. Peppe, or Giuseppe in Italian, is a petty criminal from Rome who would rather be sitting around a bountiful dinner table, but must work instead to provide for his two lazy sons and the estranged wife who's addicted to plastic surgery. In the often comic conversation that ensues between Carbieri and Peppe, one learns about the characters and their respective views about immigration to Italy. Carbieri is more receptive to the plea of immigrants for a better life, while Peppe is at first resistance to see immigrants as humans even. The spectre of illegal immigration haunts the story from the very beginning. The opening stage directions of the play reads, quote, un grande telo blu a raffigurare il cielo e il mare sul fondo che si muove col vento, una piccola barca in secca, rovesciata, con la chiglia verso il cielo, sulla spiaggia ci sono anche dei cumuli di spazzatura. This initial image brings to mind the possibilities afforded by the sea, specifically that of a better life for thousands of immigrants escaping war, poverty, and genocide, but it also suggests the intrinsic risk of their Mediterranean journey through the depiction of what might be a nautical cemetery, like those of Lampedusa and Syracuse, where shipwrecked boats that carried immigrants to Europe lies in different stages of disrepair. And that's Lampedusa. The second half of the play brings this image to fruition when a number of shipwrecked immigrants arrive onto the scene and one woman gives birth on the beach to the Mammino, the African baby Jesus of the story. What makes Clementi's play more interesting than other plays staging illegal immigration to Italy is that it does not cast immigrants as victims. If on one hand they are portrayed as exhausted and starving people, on the other they have agency and resist actively against the forces that oppress them. Clementi shies away from Italy's mediatic and pietistic representation of immigrants being held in the vigorous arms of Navy personnel or health professionals, where migrants are often made to resemble figures of religious iconography, seen in countless representation of the Pietà. The playwright does not patronize them for their abject state by turning them into recipients of European help and objects of European rescue. In doing so, he avoids the construction of immigrants as others, which ultimately excludes them from modernity as a value only white people could possess. Clementi seems to be aware firstly that Europe constructed the notion of modern as a way to hierarchize cultures and races, and secondly that Europe itself is ultimately an ideological construct built imaginatively, on a depiction of the other as both totally other and totally in need of European assistance. The binary Europe Third World is in essence a discursive strategy, a rhetorical tool to consolidate a foundational idea of self. It is predicated on critical binaries that project Europe as the center of the modern world and the rest of the world as peripheral. This juxtaposition lies on a dichotomical position such as culture versus nature, civilization versus savagery, modernity versus pre-modernity, and male European versus female other. Clementi's play successfully upsets this binary by stressing commonalities between immigrants and Italians, by crafting intercultural frames that accommodate diverse cultural traits, and ultimately by characterizing immigrants as full-fledged individuals gifted with the same sentiments shared by the Italians. When a young immigrant, Yusuf, stumbles onto the scene, Pepe asks whether he's a Cristiano, a word that in Italian means literally a Christian, but in the Roman dialect spoken by the character indicates a human being. This is clearly an old linguistic ambiguity that might reflect the prejudice that only Christians are fully human. But this use of the word, Cristiano, is quite layered because it grants Yusuf his humanity, even as he casts him as a Christian man. Even when Pepe finally realizes that Yusuf is black and exclaims un negro, Carbiele replies, sempre cristiano è, anche voi lo dicete. It's still a Christian if you said so yourself. This characterization is interesting because Clementi is once again showing the racist prejudice, the boy is negro, while simultaneously exposing the xenophobic bigotry that's authentic. He creates intercultural frames of reference through which his characters can inhabit complex and layered subject positions so that the spectators are prompted to reflect and decide whose view is worthy of espousing. He's cast in a Christian nativity that is culturally and racially diverse, where the characters inherently displays traditional iconographies of Christ's birth. The heterogeneity of Clementi's nativity is exhilarating. Jesus is black Mammino, born on a Sicilian shore rather than a Middle Eastern manger. Mary is an African woman who has been raped by her own brother and by the smuggler who captained the boat that took her to Sicily. Herod is played by the white smuggler himself, who is both a Caronte-like figure from Dante's Inferno, as well as a Captain Nemo from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The spiritual atmosphere of this nativity, however, is not entirely reassuring, nor is it fully grounded in the sacrality with which this biblical moment is normally retold. Clementi problematizes the birth of Jesus as an ecumenical event that brings peace on earth, opting instead for a metonymic representation that includes a horrifying crucifixion scene, where the boat captain is almost killed, as well as the Greek myth of Medea and her sons, folk tales from Sicily, and Christian allegories. There is a cultural inclusivity in Clementi's play that shifts the focus back and forth to the nativity itself, expanding its critical horizon and multiplying frames of reference through which it can reach a diverse group of readers and spectators. The various cultural narratives of the play are matched by a subtle use of multiple dialects and languages. When Pepe and Carbiele talk, they adopt their respective dialect, Roman and Sicilian, but communication is never problematic because Clementi adopts strategies of communication such as echo translation, comprehension checks, to clarify all linguistics interactions between the two. When the immigrants arrive, he avoids using African idioms altogether and turns instead to magic realism, a strategy that grants the newcomers the innate ability to speak Italian by virtue of their use of music and dance. Yusuf, for example, explains poetically his story while accompanying himself with the guitar, speaking perfect Italian. La mia destino è legato al mare, diversi gli amici partiti come me verso l'idea del primo mondo, immune dal deserto. My destiny is linked to the salt of the sea, where I lost my friends who, like me, came to look after the idea of the first world. Music and poetry are often charged with speaking to the heart and reaching across linguistic and cultural divides due to their rhythm and emotional delivery. And Clementi fully exploits this deeply felt notion to engage his spectators into the co-creation of new paradigms of feeling and thinking. At one point, Pepe exclaims in their own dialect, "Io non capisco come fama carisse, voi che venite da quell'altro mare e noi qua giù alla terra che finisse." I don't understand, and we can't understand each other, you coming from the other sea down under, and you and us here at the end of the earth, which is also the place of the beach where they are. In highlighting similarities between the culture of the immigrants and that of the Italian characters, Clementi debunks one of the most powerful presuppositions about immigrants, that they're radically different and therefore radically dangerous. He contests and disproves other strategies that construct Italians as completely different from immigrants and opposes the notion of Italianness as jus sanguinis, a biological and cultural status that is passed down from parents to children as genetic patrimony and cultural legacy. Clementi underlines the notion of Italianness as blood right, demonstrating in the characterization of Cardielli that the portrayal of Italy as a unified nation fails to match any reality. Its unification never resolved the nation's economic chasm between the industrial north and the agricultural south, never created a unified culture or language, and finally never overcame the deep-seated regionalism that persists today, as most Italians would rather identify themselves through the place of region where they were born instead of the nation itself. In her book, Migration Italy, The Art of Talking Back and Destination Culture, Graziella Parati addresses the constructiveness of Italian identity and argues against the notion of an Italian monoculture. She maintains that what one sees happening in Italy is a process of recoloring, which entails, quote, deliberate effort to whiten Italian culture and create a European, northern and white identity for a culture that lies at the cultural and geographical crossroads in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. End quote. Parati argued that this ongoing creation of a monoculture is the result of an ideological and rhetorical attempt to construct Italians as a homogeneous and racially stable people. Spectators experience a sense of shared humanity with the immigrant other and are invited to question the constructiveness of Italian identity and the limitations of geopolitics. Finisterre points to a scenario of true solidarity where Italians and immigrants collaborate in constructing a shared national experience. The Mediterranean Sea is represented in the play as a hybrid space that defies ideological or nationalist biases. In order to create a multicultural mosaic where the homogenizing rhetoric of national identity is questioned and eventually debunked, Clementi interweaves African legends, Judeo-Christian narratives like Christmas, the Nativity, and Noah's Ark, Greek classical myths, and a selection of different popular folk songs and poetry spoken in various languages and dialects. The playwright also confounds the temporal frames of the story so that the modern crossing of the Mediterranean by thousands of immigrants becomes reminiscent of the Atlantic Middle Passage of the African slaves, the crossing of the dead souls in Dante's Divine Comedy, and finally the transatlantic journey of thousands of Italian immigrants to the Americas in the early 20th century. This play shows that immigration is always fluid. It involves departures and landings, movements and hope, and it always is framed by complex and painful experiences of immigration and immigration. Its likening of the arrival of boats full of immigrants to the experience of Italian immigrants leaving their country in search of a better future obliterates every difference between contemporary Italians and immigrants. Cardielli himself evokes this image of a different type of exodus when he relates in song the story of his own grandfather. In conclusion, it's important to comment on the very conditions that dictate the nature of the encounter between immigrants and non-immigrants and the possible outcomes of such encounters. The play presents no final words on the phenomenon of mass immigration, but it's ending with the words of Pierpaolo Pasolini's poem La Profezia, The Prophecy. Pierpaolo Pasolini, The Prophecy. It's a text that he wrote in the early 1962, critics believe, and that was later included in a collection of poetry in 1964. But it's a text that haunted Pasolini's entire life. It actually ends up being in Uccellini Uccellacci with Totò, and it's delivered to the birds specifically. Anyway, I'll read in Italian and you can follow in English. Ha lì dagli occhi azzurri, uno dei tanti figli dei figli, scenderà da Algeri su navi a vela e a remi. Saranno con lui migliaia di uomini, coi corpicini e gli occhi di poveri cani, dei padri, sulle barche varate nei regni della fame. Porteranno con sé i bambini e il pane e il formaggio nelle carte gialle del lunedì di Pasqua. Porteranno le nonne e gli asini e saranno vestiti di camicie americane sulle triremi rubate ai porti coloniali. Sbarcheranno a Crotone o a Palmi, a milioni, vestiti di stracci. Subito i calabresi diranno, come malandrini e malandrini, ecco i vecchi fratelli, coi figli e il pane e il formaggio. Da Crotone a Palmi saliranno a Napoli e da lì a Barcellona, a Salonicco e a Marsiglia, nelle città della malavita. Anime e angeli, topi e pidocchi, col germe della storia antica, voleranno davanti al Wilayeh. Essi sempre umili, essi sempre deboli, essi sempre timidi, essi sempre infimi, essi sempre colpevoli, essi sempre sudditi, essi sempre piccoli, essi che non vollero mai sapere, essi che ebbero occhi solo per implorare, essi che vissero come assassini sottoterra, essi che vissero come banditi in fondo al mare, essi che vissero come pazzi in mezzo al cielo. Essi che si costruirono leggi fuori dalla legge, essi che si adattarono ad un mondo sotto il mondo, essi che credettero in un Dio servo di Dio, essi che cantavano ai massacri dei re, essi che ballavano alle guerre borghesi, essi che pregavano alle lotte operaie, deponendo l'onestà delle religioni contadine, dimenticando l'onore della malavita, tradendo il candore dei popoli barbari dietro ai loro ali dagli occhi azzurri, usciranno da sotto la terra per uccidere, usciranno dal fondo del mare per aggredire, scenderanno dall'alto del cielo per derubare. E prima di giungere a Parigi per insegnare la gioia di vivere, prima di giungere a Londra per insegnare ad essere liberi, prima di giungere a New York per insegnare come si è fratelli, distruggeranno Roma e sulle sue rovine deporranno il germe della storia antica. This text by Pasolini is quite striking within the context of Clementi's play because Pasolini prophesies in the early 60s the violent nature of the interaction between immigrants, Ali's sons, and Europeans as he cast their meeting in an almost apocalyptic fashion. The stage direction preceding this poem in the text, in the play, describes the immigrants as huddling together as if in a testuggine, a testudo formation, a military configuration that allowed shielded Roman soldiers to approach targets without human losses. This is a picture from the play. It seems to me that Clementi's choice of Pasolini's La Profezia might want to show the inevitability of this encounter, the inherent impossibility to deny that immigrants are here to stay, and ultimately that immigrants are already part of the fabric of Italian society. Finis Terre, the title of the play, but also the location of the beach where the play takes place, seems to suggest that the intercultural encounter between immigrants and Italians must happen, absolutely, because there is quite literally no other place to go, no other land beyond the space shared by the characters. This encounter may be felicitous or disastrous, depending on the individual choices made by both groups. The fact that at the end of the play, the tension brought about by Pasolini's poems dissipates in a festive atmosphere where the actors dance to the sound of drums and the spectator joins in, does not really eradicate, in my opinion, the subtle danger that the answer might be a different one more inevitable, threatening, and risky.
You can see from these slides. What I'd like to talk about today is offer a brief, very brief recap of how Italy has dealt with immigration, and also a few words about how the European Union is doing that now. And so I'll get right into it. Italy used to be a country of emigration, and it was it reached its high point just before the First World War, and then two things happened. The First World War stopped everything, and then fascism also did not want Italians to leave, so it was greatly reduced then. And emigration then started up again after the Second World War and went on until the 1970s. In the 1970s, two things happened. The number of Italians coming back, who'd migrated and came back, at first created a balance pretty much, with few Italians who were still leaving. And then in the second half of the 70s, immigration proper started, mainly from North Africa. In the 1980s, there was an expansion of this with the first agreements to have Moroccan workers in particular come to Italy. And then that continued afterwards into the, well, since then. Here are some figures. The most interesting ones are that last year, approximately, in 2014, 170,000 people reached Italy. Most of them came across the Mediterranean, so by sea. And today, Italy has 5.7 million immigrants here as of January 2014, and those immigrants represent 9.4% of the population. Now these are immigrants, they're not necessarily citizens, or much less legally resident. So this is also an estimated number. That, if you're interested in these comparisons, and some of you might come from the States and have an idea, Italy right now has 9% of its population foreign-born. That compares, it's still less than you have in most of the States. If that's of any interest to anybody, I'm going to skip these for the moment. These slides are about the work that then dominated in Italy. During the 90s, a lot of women were brought over, mainly to work as assisting for elderly people. The term most frequently used was a badante, and there's one hard at work next to the man. And most of these women who came over, they eventually brought husbands and children, but initially there was a way for them. Today, or at least for 2009, this gives you an idea of what the legal immigrants represent. 7.5% working population, most of them in the center and north of Italy. The south is a poorer region and has absorbed fewer. There are also fewer opportunities for them. Very discreetly, in 2009, the Bank of Italy, which is now mostly an economic study center, released data to show that in fact migrants increased employment opportunities for Italians. I say discreetly because the political atmosphere at the time was quite the opposite. The thing is that because many immigrants cannot process administrative forms and don't have necessarily the administrative skills they need, all of their businesses, and many of them set up businesses, require Italians to run them. So there's been actually an increase in the jobs available to Italians in certain service sectors, accounting, management, and this sort of thing. Where Italians may lose jobs are the very low-skilled Italians who are still around, who have to compete with less expensive foreign labor. I'm going to skip this stuff, which was about unrest caused by them. I want to pause here for a second. I don't have more updates on this, but some people often claim that migrants, of course, bring higher rates of crime. The statistics that I have seen, and I've not read most of them, but most of the experts will tell you that in fact it's a wash. We really don't know because it's very hard to do the statistics properly. At any rate, here is an interesting fact. A third of Italians' prison population is foreign. Now, if you compare that with the number of foreigners there are in Italy, surely there are more foreigners in Italian prisons than there are. Good. The percentages are there are more Moroccans than there are Albanians than there are Romanians in Italian prisons. What does that tell you? Does it tell you that Moroccans are more criminal than the Albanians, etc.? No. This reflects merely when they got here. So they've been here longer, so those who are going to end up in prison from these ways have done so, and the numbers go down afterwards. Now, one of the points I'd like to make in this talk is that Italy has, in many ways, dealt poorly or badly with the arrival of immigrants, largely because the problem has been neglected. Although brought up in the press, the problem was neglected. Starting in the second half of the 2000s, many migrants started coming in from Africa, crossing by various boats, usually reaching Sicily or parts nearby, especially the small island of Lampedusa, which is about, well, it's much closer to the coast of Libya than it is to the coast of Sicily. So what happened is many boats would land there, people would get off the boat, they were now in Italian territory, and what they hoped, which eventually happened, is that they would get transferred to Sicily, processed, and then someone would turn a blind eye, they would leave, and they would try and find work elsewhere. But the landings submerged Lampedusa many times. In fact, on one occasion, I think the date is February 2009, the people who had been held in ex-barracks here were so upset that they started burning their mattresses, and there were riots, and the police was and the army was called in to separate the town from where the immigrants were. This is what I wanted to show you, to give you an idea of how they're traveling. These are boat loads. These are pictures taken of boats who successfully reached it. Here you have an overcrowded dinghy. Here you have a fishing boat, which, can you see enough? Or should we?
I'm just wondering whether a lot.
Yeah,
Can you?
Yeah.
From,
Yeah, much bigger.
okay. So that's the kind of boat that's being employed. Most of them are fishing boats that can no longer be used by fishermen. And so then they're used typically for 1 or 2 trips. Because the safest approach is to hop on a boat like this and have the boat actually get beached. So the boat is destroyed, but you hit the beach, you can get off without knowing how to swim, you can beach. I mean, that's what you hope for. Anyway, here's the saddest of these pictures. Does anyone know what this is? It's a tuna fishing net.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, usually they're open at one end. The net is down in the sea. Once the net is filled, the fishermen close the net. The tuna stay in there, and the fishermen come back when they're ready to fish them up, which is a long business, and you need many people to do it. So the nets can be full of tuna for a week or 2 or more, depending. And what you have on this one are a lot of little dots, because evidently one boat sank nearby, and these are the people who were able to swim to the net. So they're hanging on to this net. There's another story where a Maltese fishing boat went to catch the tuna and to process the tuna, should we say. They saw that there were immigrants on board. They turned around and went back to Malta, waiting for the Italian authorities to come in and collect them. This was happening for a long time, and then one day, our former Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi, came to an agreement with the then dictator of Libya, Gaddafi, where Italy gave Libya a lot of money as nominal compensation for the damage the country had done when Libya was a colony. And in exchange for this, they also sold them some weapons, but in exchange for this, the agreement was that the Libyans would now prevent boats from leaving the Libyan coast and coming to it. And this they did for a while. For that year, there was a dip in the numbers. But then with the Arab Spring, let me see if I've got it. Yeah, with the Arab Spring, the numbers increased again. People were coming from Tunisia first, and then eventually from Libya again. In fact, at one point, Libyan loyalists in the Civil War were rounding up any boat they could find and forcing as many migrants as they could on the boats and sending them off under fire, so that they would go off to Italy, and this was done as a disturbance action. Since Italy was taking part in the bombing of Libya, or at least the military efforts, this was the best that they could do to get back at Italy, was to dump a lot of immigrants. So the immigrants clearly are being treated as, a disturbance by the Libyans, and certainly seen that way by the Italians. Here are more pictures of immigrants landing at Lampedusa, and often there are deaths involved. A boat like this, on one occasion, caused this many deaths because there was a problem with the exhaust. So the engine was running, but all of the exhaust was going into the hold that was underneath. The problem is the people who were inside the hold couldn't get out because there was no room for them on deck. So they all died of asphyxiation, and there they are lined up this way. This happened in 2011. Here's another boat where it was rescued out at sea, but it had been out at sea so long that about 100 people from that boat had died and had been tossed into the sea. More accidents occur. And I want to come to this one here, because this one made a difference. On October 3rd, another boat almost got to Lampedusa and sank right there. It was a larger boat, 150 were saved, but after some reckoning, 366 were known to be dead and 20 more missing. So this accident was serious enough that the Italian government decided they needed to do something, and they put into place an operation called Mare Nostrum. The object of Mare Nostrum was to patrol the stretch of the Mediterranean between Sicily and Libya, and at the time also perform rescues. So this was the Navy and the Air Force were both used for this operation. They actually used drones for this purpose too. So they had drones flying over the Libyan coast, and when they would spot a boat leaving, they would then try and track it to make sure it would get somewhere. This operation saved a tremendous number of lives. I don't have the numbers here for it. What I do have is an estimate of its costs. And it was costing Italy 9 to 10 million euro a month, and the European Union was contributing 9 million a year, so roughly 1/12 of the sum. And this upsets the Italian government so much that Europe was not helping them more with this issue, that eventually the next Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, our current Prime Minister, decided to opt out of the fully Italian, almost fully Italian Mare Nostrum in favor of a European-wide project called Triton. The problem is that Triton, although it was not now funded mostly by the European Union, this is for 2014, the situation has changed considerably because now most of the crossings are not taking place here. The vast number are taking place here as Syrian refugees who fled from Syria and are in Turkey, make their way across Turkey, and hop on a boat across to these islands. From there they will be ferried to Athens, and from Athens then they make their way northward towards Germany, which is mostly the goal for most of them. Most of the deaths are still occurring here, almost 3,000 of them estimated. But even here, on very short crossings, we're still looking at by now, close to 500 deaths. There were a few more over the last weekend. Now, one thing I don't have time, and I haven't thought out myself yet, but surely there is more that could be done to make that passage safer. And I think what we really should be thinking about is finding a way to bring people over, sorting them in Libya, and then boarding them on proper ships so they get here in a legal way. But that's another story. One thing that has prevented Italians from dealing with this issue seriously is this. If you make those who've landed in Italy legal, you simplify matters for them a great deal, but you're also issuing an invitation for more to try and do the same. And this is what's kept most people from simply trying to make life simpler. On the other hand, if you do not make them legal, then they remain illegal, and most of them become somehow taken up or assisted by illegal forces. I mean, most of the people get here on boats that are run by smugglers, and they pay for that. But if they then get to Italy, and the only chance they have of getting ahead is, again, to seek assistance from criminal forces, well, then we're making our problem a lot worse. Now, the other aspect of this is that once you're in Italy and you've lived here for a while, Italian law makes it very difficult for you to become a citizen. Naturalization here, until 1992, was a 5-year affair, after which you had the right to become Italian. Now instead, after 92, you have to wait 10 years, and it's at the discretion of the Italian authorities. So if for some reason they don't want to, they don't have to. Initially, there were only 1,000. This has improved. We now have about 100,000 naturalizations a year happening. And this is because Italians still favor Italian blood over Italian being born in Italy. And so we have a situation whereby if you are the grandson of an Italian living in Argentina, Canada, wherever. You need not speak Italian. You need know nothing about Italy, but you can get an Italian passport and indeed vote in Italian elections. Whereas there are people who've lived here 15, 20 years, they speak Italian, their children are in Italian schools, but they have not only no right to citizenship, but no political really, expression at all. And this seems highly counterproductive. I want to skip this part and just show you this map of where refugees are coming from. The ones from Somalia and Eritrea come through Libya, most of them. The ones from Afghanistan or Syria come through Turkey and on to Greece. The last year, we've seen a lot of talk about the problems the Syrian crisis has produced. And all I wanted to say is that whereas Italy has not come up with any decent solution, the European Union hasn't really either. This is the route that they take to get there. And I don't know if any of you have followed this in the news, but what's happened over the course of the summer is that many of the countries through which they go to try and get to European Union have closed their borders. Turkey fenced its border with Serbia, and now it fenced its border with Croatia as well. That meant that there are many stranded in Serbia and stranded in Croatia. The Croatian ones, the ones in Croatia, tried to get through Slovenia. Slovenia is also tempted to close the border, and in the meantime, they've decided to prevent more than 2,500 to come in each day. Now you might say, okay, well look, isn't Greece part of the European Union? Sure. Turkey is not yet, but they're talking about it. The problem for the Greeks is they just don't have the resources of their own. I don't know if you've heard, but they're in very serious debt problems these days. So they just don't have the resources. It's much simpler for them to simply say, okay, we'll ferry you to Athens and then we'll wave goodbye, go on your way. So if Europe wants to do something serious here, then they're going to have to provide a little bit more assistance. The current regime established in 2012 was for the first European country in which an immigrant lands to process them. But the Greeks have been sloppy about it. The Italians to some degree have as well. And this has caused problems later on. This would be the easiest thing to solve. This is a problem you can throw money at. But then that's only the beginning of the story. So, the European Union has tried to come up with a way to redistribute these refugees. And they've come up with a number of ways of doing it, which all make sense. They look at population, they look at unemployment, they look at gross domestic product per capita. So there are ways of trying to distribute these refugees in various countries according to that country's capabilities, what they can absorb. The problem is this arrangement is imposed by the Commission, and most of the countries in the European Union dislike it. Quite apart from countries like Hungary, who are now part of the Union, and simply refuse point blank to have anything to do with this. So we've got another problem, a different problem here for the European Union, for these refugees, mainly Syrians. The last thing I want to say is, right now, most of the decisions that are being made, or the approaches that are being taken, make a very clear distinction between refugees and immigrants for economic opportunities. That is, people coming from Africa, for instance, aren't necessarily coming from a country that is war-torn or whatever. They're coming because the opportunities are better. A refugee is someone who's been forced out of his or her home, indeed forced out of his country, or her country. And on those grounds, it seems refugees are owed more assistance because they didn't make the choice to move to Italy to try to come to Italy or Germany. True. However, that distinction really doesn't carry that much weight. It would if we were talking about refugees who are still in Turkey. But once the refugees start moving and make their way into Europe, then the difference between them and a opportunity immigrants is really much less. They're all trying to get to Germany. Why is that? Well, because that's where they have the best chances of getting a better income. So this focus on the refugees is I mean, perfectly fine for the refugees. But it does mean that right now we're forgetting the fact that there are many, many more immigrants who are coming into Europe, who are not coming here necessarily as refugees, and we should also think about them. All right, I think my time's up, right?
I write to the world. I want to try and make you understand. We are children of war. We fear the same bombs as you do. Think of us as your own, or maybe even the child you have to have one day. We are like caged birds running to the sea because it's safer than land. Already we know it's better to die in the arms of hope than a terrorist's bomb.
In the past, as in contemporary times, food, arts, politics and religions have been effective in understanding the changing landscape when cultures merge. The concept of a Mediterranean identity is shifting, and this has not been more evident in the past 2 decades, building to the current humanitarian crisis, with thousands making the perilous journey across the Mediterranean. In the past, merging of cultures happened more slowly. However, today, constant wars, famine, poverty and terrorism in the Middle East and Africa are push factors in causing people to flee via the Mediterranean. From this perspective, never before has there been a need to really understand it's changed. For both the asylum seeker and host countries, fear must not rule. Instead, an acknowledgement and acceptance of the commonality of the human experience. My family became exiles under Mussolini's regime due to their political and social activism. They, along with other notable Italian exiles, continued their human rights work in Australia as members of the Italia Libera movement, where they helped Italians free Italy, and in post-war Australia they assisted the flow of Italian migrants as they came in droves for a better life, per una vita migliore. My generation sits between 2 cultures in what I term as a hybrid identity. This is not new either. In my case, social justice, human rights and politics define who I am. In terms of the concept of identity with a Mediterranean framework, my Italian culture dictates to come from a human rights perspective. And for the purpose of this paper, it is in the context of Operation Mare Nostrum. French philosopher Gilles Deleuze discussed affect and the idea that messages we receive on a conscious level may be less important to what we receive non-consciously. Thus, affect is the non-conscious message that resonates deep within, enabling social change to take place. In October 2013, more than 366 migrants died off the coast of Lampedusa. And the incident sent shockwaves across Italy, and public outcry created such massive affect that Operation Mare Nostrum was implemented. In the year it was active, it saved in excess of 150,000 lives. This was a time when Italy was struggling with its own financial crisis, had cut spending on military, yet deployed a total of 32 boats, submarine assistance, planes, helicopters, all in a bid to save lives. There was almost no help from the larger EU countries. And as Britain's Foreign Office made very clear, we do not support planned and search rescue operations in the Mediterranean, and we believe they create an unintended pull factor, encouraging more migrants to attempt the dangerous journey crossing the sea, thereby leading to more tragic, unnecessary deaths. I posit that this is not just a complete lack of understanding of the push factors, but in fact, fear of the stranger. Under Berlusconi, who rejected a multi-ethnic Italy and implemented the harsh rispedimenti policy, similar to Tony Abbott in Australia, Italy may have agreed with this rhetoric. Instead, Operation Mare Nostrum welcomed a stranger, gave medical assistance, shelter, food, legal aid, and treated each refugee with dignity. This operation spoke volumes and was applauded globally, thus illustrating a power of a humanitarian model in countries like Australia, where cruel and inhumane immigration practices have countered a multicultural, multi-ethnic Australia it once was. From a global perspective, I see Mare Nostrum as a model that developed countries can look towards in terms of initiating a sense of unity between cultures. With Mare Nostrum officially ended, Triton, a very modest and less effective project in comparison, has taken its place. However, the Italians in the south continue to rescue those seeking asylum, representing a beacon of hope amidst one of the darkest times in history in terms of global misery since World War II. The photograph of the dead Syrian child appeared to be a turning point in respect to global responsibility, and it prompted the EU into action. And Germany's bid to take 800,000 refugees is one example of this turn, though the situation is not perfect. Yet Italy, Greece, and to a lesser extent Malta, do continue to bear the burden of an unprecedented number of refugees. However, under the Dublin regulation, refugees are to be settled in the first country of asylum. Greece, Italy and Croatia have allowed migrants to pass through to other countries where they have families and better prospects. If the Dublin regulation is enforced, and there is a significant opposition to this, the impact on southern European countries already stretched beyond their limits will be enormous, notwithstanding the effect of further re-traumatising. The EU crisis is massive, and with Mare Nostrum gone, one could ask why countries would actually oppose saving lives. According to Amanda Torp in her article, Europe's Refugee Crisis Explained, she sees the problem as fear of the stranger or the other, as opposed to something like a financial crisis, which is what they're discussing now. Much of Europe is wealthy, as are Australia and the United States. Australia has some of the best resettlement programs in the world, but not for boat people. Even though we are a nation of boat people built on the backs of refugees and migrants, and there is no doubt that we could bear the cost of resettling refugees, particularly as Australia spends in excess of 1.3 billion Australian dollars annually on offshore camps where inhumane conditions contravene numerous UN conventions. Bearing in mind, I'm only talking about 119,000 refugees. So clearly in Australia, the issue isn't about finances, nor is it about saving lives. Rather, it is the potential change which refugees will bring, notwithstanding strong elements of Islamophobia that is spreading like a disease since the recent bombings in Paris. These are challenges that mean overcoming the political forces that drive right-wing populism and anti-immigration policies, particularly in the wealthier countries. Like Torb, I contend that fear of the stranger often comes down to anxiety about change. We live in a time where the most affluent countries already feel threatened about the waves of migration, as well as having to accept that the current model of their respective communities is going to change. Journalist Max Fisher discussed that taking in large numbers of refugees ultimately means that communities need to shift or modify the original version of what they perceived or see their community or village. It's not a big thing, it's just a shift. So the town or village may not look like what it wanted. Riace, which I'll discuss in the end, has had great success with this. While fear spreads like an Australian bushfire, the world seems to forget the great contributions of the refugee. Rather than fear the stranger, we need to embrace the change and acknowledge what history has told us in terms of the positive impacts made by refugees and migrants. And Australia is possibly a country that speaks to this, really speaks to this. Yet we do not hear anything, and it's not evident in our policies. So why do people become fearful when history sings a different tune? Though Italy and Greece are the first country of asylum for refugees, most aim to move north where opportunities and fear of the stranger are greater. But they wait in the heart of the Mediterranean until they move on. And in that period of waiting, these new cultures do alter the Mediterranean identity. While Mare Nostrum brought many different people to its shores, I think its most profound effect or affect is that it woke up the world to a humane approach and saw the face of the refugee. It saw where the refugee came from. It heard stories of extraordinary hardship, of rape, kidnappings. It saw also courage, resilience and determination, and gratitude. In short, Operation Mare Nostrum speaks to people like us and the tragic fact of the collective vulnerability of humankind. No one is exempt. In the last 10 years or more, I've seen a significant movement towards the development of an Italian-style multiculturalism. There are many more Indians, Bangladeshis setting up businesses, or the large number of Sikhs who have settled in the Po Valley in the province of Reggio Emilia and have literally kept the Parmesan cheese businesses alive. Of course, there are the refugees who sell their wares in the streets, and many more wearing hijab are visible.
Ma dovete pensare anche che una sola nazione non può essere il contenitore degli arrivi all'infinito. Però questa volta penso di contribuire, lo faccio col cuore.
So to finish, I will return to the village of Riace in Calabria. This is a lovely example of a multi-ethnic, multicultural Mediterranean. What Riace has done could work across Italy, Greece, Western Europe. Since 1998, when 200 Kurds were found on a beach near Riace, Domenico Lucano, now the mayor of Riace, has been trying to find ways to assist those seeking asylum. Rather than see the Kurds incarcerated in the detention centres, he offered them homes in Riace's many abandoned village and houses, as the town at the time was literally disappearing due to lack of employment and opportunities. Using what little resources was left, Lucano set up a settlement program which actually saved the school from closure, and by 2013 boasted, I think, 8 nationalities. This resettlement program is a model that Europe and indeed Australia would do well to study, as it positively impacts both the refugee and the town. In Italy, there are numerous abandoned houses, and in Australia, we actually need people in our rural towns, that is, in the outback. We need doctors, teachers, and they're in the detention centres. However, Riace, as many refugees will say, does not offer a long-term possibility. And many move on after years, even maybe 1 year, and others stay and make a life. Local funding has realised the opening of an artisan workshop where migrants can earn a wage learning trades that were dying out. At the glassmakers, there's an Afghan woman who fled the Taliban, and she's working on the old-fashioned glass mosaic, while a Nigerian journalist is learning embroidery from a Riace woman who learned her skills from the local nuns. The flood of refugees pouring into Europe could be the next wave of change for the better in many dying villages. Yes, I'm an optimist. And though some may only stay for short periods, they can move on with trade and future possibilities. The surge of refugees moving through Italy could keep some villages alive for years to come. Not only in Italy is this a possibility, but Australia, Western Europe. Initiatives such as these come with a price. But is cultural merging really a price for peace, safety, and the potential for new beginnings that assist a broad section of the global community of which we all belong? The journey across the Mediterranean is never more dangerous without Mare Nostrum, and the refugees, the self-exiles, are taking perilous risks in the name of peace. In essence, Operation Mare Nostrum welcomed a stranger, and yes, migration does risk changing our lives. It has shifted the Mediterranean story as it addresses working within a multi-ethnic society. We must remember that the history of Italy, as all of Europe, has a narrative of thousands of years, and it will always be Italy. The benefits of migration, as the past indicates, will inevitably outweigh the disadvantages and will be included in the Mediterranean story. Those who do seek asylum have chosen exile, and this, in itself, as Edward Said says, is courageous. I witnessed the difficulties of my grandparents and my mother in a new land, but the journey made them more resourceful, great contributors to literature, the arts, medicine, and human rights. This in turn left a humanitarian legacy to the next generation. In Edward Said's words, adapting to the new condition of life in exile is always done as it gives the person who experiences it multi-perspectives on life. On the other hand, exile becomes an endless process in its very nature, is never the state of being satisfied, placid or secure. The humanity in Operation Mare Nostrum put Italy on the map as a leader in understanding the responsibility in a global crisis. Though fear of the stranger is natural, not welcoming the stranger is less so. So, from this Australian, and from our problems in Australia, I say, grazie tanti Italia. You have had great effect. You have humbled the world and shown through action true compassion. Grazie.